All right, this video is going to cover another big area of research and attention, which is active search, where you're looking around trying to find a specific target among a bunch of distractors. So we're going to concentrate on visual search, but the same kind of process can be at play when you listen for a specific voice among a cacophony of voices, or if you're trying to find a specific Lego among a bunch of Legos, like when you're blindfolded or using only your sense of touch. So that's the idea of active search. Let's start with a little game. If you've never seen Where's Waldo books, they're a popular kids book where you try to find this guy in a red and white striped shirt amongst a bunch of sort of a really noisy scene with a bunch of different distractors. So let's try a couple of these and see if we can find Waldo. So try to find Waldo in this picture. You might actually want to pause and look and see if you don't find him in a minute or so, then unpause and move on. All right. So is Waldo in this picture? Hopefully you paused and tried it. Yes, he's there in the upper left. Some people are going to find him fast. Some will take ages. Some people give up first. Sometimes it depends where you started looking. Let's try another one, another example. See if you can find Waldo in this picture. Again, by pausing the video, and if you don't find him in a minute or so, unpause and we'll move on. Okay, so is he in this picture? Yeah, he's a little bit harder to see, but he's kind of tucked behind a couple people in the lower left quadrant there. Let's do another one. Try to find Waldo with the video paused, but unpause if you don't find him after a minute or so. All right, so was he in this one? And the answer is, I'm afraid not. The part of the page he was on actually isn't in this picture, so you shouldn't have been able to find him anywhere in the picture. Now, it's possible if you were rushed and we made you make like a yes or no judgment in 3 seconds or something quick like that, you might say yes just because you saw this dude near the middle with the red and white stripes, or you briefly saw some red and white in the upper left there, but that would be like a false alarm, right? That would be thinking you detected the signal where it's not there. All right, let's do one more. See if you can find Waldo in this picture. Again, pause the video, but unpause if you don't see him after a minute. All right, so is he in this one? And yes, he's up there in the middle, sure enough. And this one's tough. And part of the reason is there's a bunch of red and white stripes throughout this picture, right? So kind of a high level broad scan for that particular feature, it doesn't narrow in on him very quickly or very easily. So it's forcing you to more slowly search the scene, maybe kind of systematically, for a combination of that feature, the red and white stripes, plus other features like his hair, his hat, his glasses, stuff like that. And that's a key to why these Waldo scenes can be so challenging and sometimes take us a while. If we were just scanning for a single feature that stood out from everything else, this would go fast. Like if he was the only one with red and white, then it would be easy to find him. But instead, we get a bunch of reds and whites, but on the wrong object. Or if we find blue similar to his pants color, but in combination with the wrong shape or part of a shirt, something like that. So that makes it a lot harder when we have to look for that combination of features. So this task we were just doing, it's called a search task, where we're actively looking or scanning for a target by effortfully directing our attention. This is an attentional task. You'll often see this called an active search task because you're doing it consciously and with control of where your attention is going at any given time. Almost kind of like directing a spotlight around the scene or zooming in and out to pay close attention to a small or a large area. Now, when it comes to vision, we do active search tasks all the time, like looking for the thing you want at the grocery store amongst a bunch of other products. If you're looking for, say, vegetarian chili, you might be able to scan large areas quickly for a can-shaped object, right? That's a single feature. You can kind of just hone in. Is this a can? Is this a can? You can catch that real quick. But once you get to a bunch of shelves full of canned foods, you may have to slow down and look sequentially through them for a can shape combined with certain color combinations, right? Especially if you want to narrow it down to a specific brand that you're looking for. That is active search. Or when a squirrel outside is looking for fallen nuts surrounded by fallen leaves, they're kind of visually doing this visual search to know where to go and grab for the nut instead of leaves. Or when you're trying to find like a specific piece of paper on a messy desk. That's visual search, right? It's an active search task in the visual modality. Now, we can better understand the mechanism of this attentional process by bringing it into the laboratory and testing it under controlled circumstances where we can manipulate independent variables to kind of see how they affect performance. So I'll give you some examples of a simplified version of how we might do this in the lab. In the following displays, I want you to search for a red vertical line. It'll actually be pretty simple, but search for a red vertical line. Try to find it as fast as you can. Like imagine you're on a game show with a ton of money on the line. If you can do this faster than anyone else, but you still have to be accurate. Like you'll lose all your money if you press the button when there's no red vertical line. Got it? So you want to find the red vertical line if there is one, and you would, press a button as quick as you could. So here we go. Let's see a few examples. Okay, so you'd press the button if there was one there. Let's do another. Again, you'd press a button. So yeah, there was a red vertical line. You'd press a button on that one. Let's do some more. Probably pretty easy, right? But again, we can measure how long it takes you. So we're going to be writing down your reaction time. If we're doing this in the lab, a computer will be recording your reaction time for these different types of trials, right? These different variations we're doing. Not surprisingly, we usually get a pretty quick reaction time for that one. Let's do another. Again, you probably saw the red vertical line there. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Let's do another. All right, and there was one there too. So those were all pretty simple, and in this case, the ones I gave here all did have vertical red lines, but some of them had quite a bit more going on in the scene, in the display, than others did. So if we were to plot out like the average reaction time for a bunch of people across those different stimuli, across those different displays, we're going to find faster or slower responses for some of those displays. And it turns out there's a pretty straightforward explanation of which stimuli slow people down. So in some of those examples we saw, like the two examples here, there is only one single thing that's different between our target and all the distractors. Like on the leftmost example, color alone is enough to find it. So it kind of pops out from the background, right? Or on the right example, orientation alone is enough to find it. So again, it kind of pops out from the distractors. This simplest kind of search, it's called a feature search, where our brain only has to compare one feature, like only color or orientation or size or movement, but one feature, and that single difference alone is enough to set our target apart from the distractors. On the other hand, some of the stimuli that we saw in our example were more like this one on the right. Notice how searching for the red alone wouldn't work here. If we're just looking based on color, that doesn't get us to whether our target's there or not. And also, searching for vertical orientation alone doesn't work here, right? Because some things can have vertical orientation without being our target. So instead, we have to look for an object that has a conjunction, a combination of both features in order to catch our target. So this type of search is called a conjunction search, where we're comparing a combination of multiple features like color and orientation, or color and size. Or in the case of Where's Waldo, red and white stripes combined with glasses and a hat and blue pants. Because a single feature alone isn't enough to distinguish him from the distractors. That's what makes Waldo a conjunction search. And sure enough, it turns out that conjunction searches tend to be a lot slower than feature searches when we look at reaction time. So here's some example data. The red line here, that's for conjunction searches, different conditions of doing a conjunction search, and the blue line is for feature search. And what we're plotting here is reaction time on the y-axis, like just how long it takes people to find the target when there is one, and maybe they have to press a button, right? So we just look at the trials where they got it correct. In other words, the trials with a hit, not the false alarm trials, not the missed trials. And then on the x-axis, we've got display size, just meaning how many items there were on the screen for a given display when we flashed it up there. So as you can see, display size doesn't really matter for feature search, but it makes a huge difference for conjunction search. So that tells us something important about how our brain is doing the searching in these two types of situations, when we can just distinguish things based on a single feature versus when we have to look for a conjunction of features, like in these two. And you can see that the number of items matters a lot more in that type of search, in a conjunction search. So the reason feature search is so much faster is that we do the searching in a parallel manner, meaning we can search a ton of locations all at once without having to focus in and examine each individual item one at a time. We can sort of take in the whole display all at once. On the other hand, based on that slower reaction time that we're seeing that's kind of linearly related to the size of the display, we can assume a conjunction search is happening in a more serial manner. And sure enough, if we look at people's eye movement during this task, using eye tracking, we see that they go from place to place to place to place. So they're kind of doing one item at a time being examined. That's what we mean by serial or sequential processing. In other words, we're consciously directing our attention from place to place, from item to item, until we either hit the target we're looking for or exhaust the search. So that's what makes conjunction search so much slower and why it can take a ton of time to find Waldo in the books, but it'd be downright instant if everything else on the Waldo page was green and yellow and he was the only red item on the page. Then it would be a feature search and we'd be able to do it at a glance. Okay, let's see a couple more examples of this just to make the idea more clear. I'm going to show a display and you just have to find the T as quick as possible if there is one. Like you're trying to beat all the other players on the game show, but again, you get punished if you buzz in when there's no T. So are you ready? Here we go. Okay, so you probably found the T without too much trouble, but it might have taken a few seconds depending where you started. Maybe you're still looking, but you just found it now. Obviously in the lab, we would randomize where the T is because, you know, people based on their reading habits might always start in the upper left. So some trials, if the T is near the upper left, it gets found earlier than the bottom right. So we randomize that stuff or counterbalance it. And of course, we might make this a lot harder if instead of just putting the T among a bunch of L's, we might put it among a bunch of L's plus a bunch of upside down T's plus some backward L's, in which case it actually slows down people quite a lot. And of course, if we put more items on the display, it's also going to slow down people more for something like this. It's a conjunction search, right? We have to look for that exact combination, not just for a vertical and a horizontal line, but for them being related in the right kind of combination or the right orientation to it relative to each other. Now, let's try another example. Again, this time your goal is to find a target. In this case, we'll say find the O as quickly as possible if there actually is an O. So are you ready? Here we go. And in this case, it's pretty much instantaneous for most people. The O kind of has a pop-out effect where it stands out to us even if we're just looking at the kind of the whole thing and not even focusing on the region where the O is. You don't even have to be looking in that area and that O pops out. It just looks so distinct, right? It differs in a basic feature that sets it apart from everything else. You don't have to look for a combination of features or a conjunction of features. So this one is a feature search. And when we time these two examples out, we always find that people are faster with finding the O and slower with finding the T. So finding the T is slower on average because you have to look for a combo of horizontal and vertical lines, like a particular combination of those two things, a conjunction. Whereas finding the O is going to be a lot faster because it has just a completely different shape. Like one distinct feature is enough to distinguish it from everything else. So it's a feature search. And even if we had 500 L's that the O was hidden among, or 5,000 L's that the O was hidden among, it would still pop out almost instantly. So all these studies showing differences between feature search and conjunction search, they led researchers to propose kind of a more general theory of attention that would help explain this stuff. So around 1980, Triesman and some of her collaborators proposed what they call feature integration theory as a really general model for how we perceive objects, which also happens, the model also happens to explain why feature searches are easier than conjunction searches. But it's a more general model trying to figure out how does perception work? Like how does the brain deal with seeing objects in front of us and making sense of them? And her model, her theory, just happens to also explain why feature searches are easier than conjunction searches. So what she thinks is going on is that our brain makes sense of objects in the scene, objects in front of us, in a two-step process. Sorry, I shouldn't say second stage yet. So, okay, here we go. First, there's a stage that involves automatic, unconscious detection of the features of objects, like color, size, orientation, whatever, right? At this stage, the brain is doing the processing of the proximal stimulus, the thing that hit our eye, our retina, but we don't yet experience seeing an object or anything like that. This is all behind the scenes in the first stage. And we know the brain has mechanisms for detecting individual features because we have things like simple cells in the visual cortex that fire only for a line or an edge that's at a particular orientation. That's a little feature detector, a little orientation detector. And likewise, we've got 3 different types of light-sensitive cones in our eyes, which can distinguish a feature like color based on the proportionate amount of firing by each of those 3 cone types. So at the first stage, at this earlier stage, the brain is kind of registering all of those individual features. But of course, when we see an object like a basketball, off in our left visual field, we don't see an orangeness feature over there and separately see a roundness feature over there. No, we see it as a single object with multiple features kind of bound together. We perceive it as a single thing with different qualities like color and shape and size. So Triesman proposes there's like a second stage that the brain does, which is connecting two or more features together, what we call binding. And in her model, this process, this second stage, requires some amount of conscious attention. So her model proposes that the second stage works smoothly when we're attending to something, but not so much to things we're not consciously attending to. So she's got this two-stage model, feature integration theory. Starts out pre-attentive, becomes more attentive. So more visually, we might lay out feature integration theory like this flowchart here. The first stage is the pre-attentive stage, behind the scenes processing, just kind of the individual features separately. And then we've got a focused attention stage afterward where the features get combined together in the brain, at which point we're going to perceive something as a whole object with those features bound together. That's the point at which we're actually having a perceptual experience, where we're phenomenologically saying, oh, I see something, right? That means her model can explain why we would see what we do in feature search versus conjunction search. Like, feature search can be done in parallel because we don't have to use up limited attentional resources to, bind and combine multiple features together. We're not there yet. Whereas in conjunction search, we have to do that second stage of processing on each of the locations in the display in order to combine the features together to know if it has the combination of features we're looking for, the whole combined object, right? That requires our limited attentional resources. So it's going to be, based on this model, we would predict it's going to be slower and has to be done one object at a time. It has to be done serially, sequentially, which is why we get the display size effect for conjunction searches. Bigger display slows us down more. Now the question is, how might we test this theory? Like, sure, it explains the feature versus conjunction search stuff, but that's easy for any theory to do after the fact. The question is what new predictions the theory makes that we could go and test in the lab. So that's what Triesman set out to test. And one of her most famous studies is one she did in 1982. So we'll talk about that. Now, Triesman and her colleague Schmidt in 1982, they came up with a clever experiment. Her theory, proposes that we need to attend to something in order for the features to get bound together in a conjunction, into a combo object, like a red triangle or a blue triangle or a red circle or whatever. So they came up with an experiment where they would briefly flash color shape combinations like that on a screen and see if people could correctly identify that they had seen something like a green square or a blue circle when people are either able to attend to the object, or in a different condition, they made it so people weren't attending to the object to see if they still could see it as a color shape combination, like a green triangle or a blue square or whatever. So here's their clever and elegant little research design. They just briefly flashed two numbers, one on each side, and four shapes, kind of like the display here, but just really briefly flashed it on the screen, and then it disappeared. And they flashed a visual mask, just meaning some like noisy filler pattern to cover up that part of the screen. Now the task for participants was simple. Every trial, when one of these displays was flashed, first you report the numbers, then you report the shapes. Just see how many of those shapes your brain can get to, how many it can process before time runs out, and it's kind of all out of your memory, so to speak, right? Or overwritten by the filler masking pattern that we put up. So that's the setup she did. What they found was interesting. In about 18% of trials, people reported an incorrect association of features, what they called in this an illusory conjunction of features. In other words, if we had flashed this display here, we would sometimes get reports of people saying they saw a green triangle or a red circle. And there certainly is a green thing and a triangle, and there is a red thing and a circle, but their brain was making mistakes at the stage of trying to combine them because there wasn't enough time to process each object as a whole conjunction of features. So they made a guess and they were wrong. They were reporting these illusory conjunctions. And what's really cool is in a control condition, they found that there were no illusory conjunctions if the participants were able to attend to the object. So if participants were asked to focus specifically on one target object, Rather than reporting the numbers first and then all 4 of the objects, if they do that, we know that they can get it right. They'd never make any mistakes. So we know they can perceive a combined object properly if they attend to it, but not if they don't have time to attend to each thing long enough for that sort of second stage of focused attention to combine the features together into a single bound object. In other words, this is evidence supporting feature integration theory, that all the objects in this experiment are getting into an early stage of processing, since the people are accurate if they're asked about only one specific location, but that those objects aren't getting processed as a bound, combined kind of shape plus color until a later stage in processing. And in the lab, when we're doing this quickly, right, we're giving people only a little bit of time, then we're at the limits of our capacity, and that's when we make mistakes during that stage. That's why often a cognitive psychology study will do these trials like very quick, only flashing things on the screen briefly, or making you try to answer as quickly as possible, like in a search task, because in an artificial lab setting, we can bring you to the limits of your capacity, and then those errors or the speed differences that we find, those can tell us what mechanisms your brain is using behind the scenes to do something as simple as see a basketball, and specifically to see a basketball as a round and orange object, rather than separately as there's a round thing and separately there's an orange thing. Now, I'll end with a fun demonstration of this binding idea of combining features together to perceive things. So in the following display, I'm going to show a bunch of moving dots, and you just need to stare at the middle of the screen. So it's fine to blink. Don't worry, you don't have to keep your eyes open or anything, but just keep looking at the middle of the screen. Make sure you don't move your eyes off anywhere else. Okay, so here we go. Now, as you watch this display, without moving your eyes, just attend to how the red dots are moving. So you're looking in the middle of the screen. It's okay to blink. Keep looking at the middle. The red dots are going down and green dots go up, right? Is that what you're seeing? So keep your eyes in the middle. Don't look off to the sides. Just keep in the middle. But now I want you to covertly direct your attention off to the sides without actually looking there. Just kind of like think about the sides, pay attention to the sides, but with your eyes still focused on the middle. The red dots are still moving downward, correct? Okay. Now that you've experienced that and noticed that, now you can actually move your eyes around. And I want you to go look directly to the right side of the display, or look at the far left side of the display. Which way are the red dots actually going off on the sides? And you'll now see that the red ones are actually moving upward on the sides. They're only moving downward in the middle where you were originally looking. So why the hell did it seem like all the red ones on the screen were moving downward when you were looking at the middle of the screen? Well, your brain is doing two things here. First off, it's following some Gestalt principles, like the principle of similarity, where it groups all the red dots together, and the principle of common fate, where we see things as a grouping if they're all moving in the same way. But at the same time, your brain is going through those steps of binding that are part of feature integration theory. So off in the periphery, the brain is doing its best to combine the color feature of red with the motion feature into unified objects of color plus motion, red going this way. But this display, right, it's a trick display. This display tricks and confuses the system using those Gestalt principles. But if we can attend to that area directly, if you actually look off directly to the sides, bring your attention focused to that area, then our brain can do the full conjunction, right? We can do the full second stage of consciously attentive processing, in which case we do accurately see what's happening. We see the red dots moving upward off on the sides. So that's an example of feature integration theory right here with this fun little display. Anyway, that's enough for this video on search tasks and what they tell us about attention. In the next couple of videos, we're going to talk about selective attention and also about divided attention before we see some more real-life applications.